Welcome to the second part of my series on What's Love Got to Do with It? If you haven't watched the first video of this series, please do so, as in that video I describe 8 types of love that the ancient Greeks used, and I'll be referring to those throughout this video. The 2 points that I want to make regarding the discussion from my last video are, first of all, make sure that you and others understand what you mean and what they mean when we use the term love. Now, that may sound like an odd suggestion. It's not as though someone says, I love you, and you're automatically going to say, what do you mean by that? So we can see how people love us through their actions. The old saying, actions speak louder than words, is very true. If you claim to love someone in a specific type of relationship, you need to make sure your actions are consistent with that to show what you mean by the word love. Also, though, there may be times where there's confusion, where one person is using the term love in one way and one person's using it in another or perceiving it in another. The most common example we see of this evidenced in sitcoms or romantic comedies is when you have often a male and a female, and they've been friends for a long time, so they've developed a really strong bond of phileo love. And then at one point, one of them, often the male in the sitcoms we see, will decide that he wants to take the relationship to the next level. So he broaches the subject with the girl, who then responds as, oh, I love you as a friend. And this propels the guy into the friend zone from which he will never now escape in this relationship. So clearly there needed to be communication as to what kind of love was being expressed in that particular kind of relationship. And there is actually a term for this kind of discussion. It's called a DTR, or define the relationship talk. And so there may be times when that kind of talk needs to occur. Now, I know hearing that you're only friends with someone with whom you have feelings more than that and you want to develop more of a relationship is painful, but it's not going to be any less painful later down the road when you've continued to develop those feelings more. So first, make sure you and others understand what you mean by the term love. Second, make sure that your actions match the type of love you claim to have. Now, I touched on this in my first point, but it's important to make sure that your actions go along with and substantiate your words. So, for example, if you claim to have a phileo love towards another person, that relationship should be characterized by loyalty, trust, and you should demonstrate that you value your friend. If you claim to have storge love for another person, then you need to be willing to accept that it may be one-sided and continue to give unconditionally. If you claim to have pragma love, then you need to stay committed to that relationship. And while I'm on the subject of pragma love, I want to talk specifically about romantic love for a minute. Psychologist Robert Sternberg developed what he called the triangular theory of romantic love. And in this theory, he describes romantic love as being comprised of 3 potential components: intimacy, commitment, and passion. And depending on how these 3 components are present and whether they are, he discusses different types of love that would flow out of that. As I mentioned before, our modern idea of love is historically and culturally based. In our modern society, we put a lot of emphasis on that passionate or eros type of love. And we can see this in movies, sitcoms, as well as songs that talk about love as being something that you fall into like a ditch and you fall out of like a tree. It's very fleeting in its duration. Now, emotions by nature are fleeting. That's why it's important that in relationships that last, we don't simply rely on that passion, but we also move to more deep relationships that involve commitment. So love is ultimately a choice. You may not necessarily choose the type of person you're attracted to, but if you're going to continue in a relationship, you have to choose to do so. Historically, up until the early 1900s in this country and still in many other cultures, marriages are arranged. That seems unfathomable to us today. But in those cultures, parents would choose who their child was going to marry. It was often a financial arrangement, but it was also based on family similarities, cultural similarities. And in those kinds of relationships, the people didn't have the opportunity usually to develop passionate love before they got married, nor did they even really have the opportunity to develop intimacy and a bonding before they were married. Really, all they had was the commitment they made in marriage, and that had to suffice them until they were able to be together and hopefully develop passion and intimacy as the marriage progressed. You may be in a marriage that's existed for quite a while, and you may not have that passion that you once had, but you can still choose to continue to develop intimacy, to continue to stay committed. And often when you make that choice, the passion can rekindle and continue to develop. So I have 3 points associated with the second idea of making sure your actions match the kind of love you claim to have. First is choose to love. The second one is choose to stay in love or continue in love. And that applies especially to those relationships to which you have made a commitment. And then the third one is choose to act in loving ways. So in my next video, I'm going to continue my discussion of love by talking about the languages of love. Until next time, I'm the Communication Doc, wishing you healthy relationships through competent communication.